At last night's CNN gun town hall, Obama had this frustrating interaction with Anderson Cooper.
This notion of a conspiracy out there, and it gets wrapped up in concerns about the federal government. Now, there's a long history of that. That's in our DNA. The United States was born suspicious of some distant authority.
But let me just jump in. Is it fair to call it a conspiracy? I mean, well, yeah. There's a lot of people really believe this deeply, that they just don't. No. They just don't trust you.
I'm sorry, Cooper. Yes, it is fair to call it a conspiracy. What are you saying? Are you suggesting that the notion that we are creating a plot to take everybody's guns away so that we can impose martial law
but there's certainly a
is
lot of
a
people.
Conspiracy? Yes, that is a conspiracy. I would hope that you would agree with that. Is that controversial? Except on some websites around the country?
There are certainly a lot of people who just have a fundamental distrust that you do not want to go further and further and further down this road.
Look, I mean, I'm only going to be here for another year. I don't know. When would I have started on this enterprise?
It was the framing of the question by Anderson Cooper that was extremely frustrating. Anderson Cooper overall is better than a lot of TV journalists in a number of different ways, but he does occasionally, in very high-profile situations, and it seems like generally with Democrats, feel that he needs to be overly apologetic in presenting the views of people who are incorrect. And we saw this at the Democratic debate about a month ago when he was framing questions like a crazy right-winger blogging on Town Hall was writing them. And I understand that as a part of the media, and he considers himself to be a responsible part of it, you can't simply lob softballs at the president, and I don't want you to. And you can bring up the conspiracies as he did there. But you can't simply present it and say that, well, there are a lot of people who deeply believe it. Now you go. Yes, that's true, but that's true of any number of different things. There are a lot of people who very deeply believe that we've never been to the moon. There are people who deeply believe that the Holocaust didn't happen. There are people who deeply believe all sorts of crazy shit. And you can say they deeply believe it, but if you're a part of the media, and it's your task, historically, through the history of the United States, to educate the public and to make sure that they're ready for politics, and particularly for elections, which we are in an election cycle right now, as we always are in America, that they understand what's actually going on. You can't simply say something stripped entirely of context when you know better and say that that's being a journalist. I love polls, okay? And I will frequently talk about polls on this channel, on Think Tank, on the Young Turks. But I don't simply say, here is what the American people think. 82% think this. See you in the next one, guys. No, because that is so devoid of context. First of all, maybe they're wrong to believe the thing that they think. Maybe there's a good explanation for why the American public thinks a certain thing or doesn't think a certain thing. First of all, the media influences those polls. And for instance, if you say people really care about X, and it's something that you've been talking about every day for weeks and weeks, perhaps that's worthy of mention. Even talking about the polls can influence future polls. And so it's of course something that you should integrate into a conversation about politics or society or anything else, but you can't ignore the context. And it's the same exact thing with these gun things. So these conspiracy theorists believe that Obama is going to take all their guns and ban private gun ownership. That's the hardcore version. Well, I guess the harder core version is that he's going to kill every white person. But the more moderates believe that he's simply going to take away every gun and ban gun ownership. And they have believed this since before he was president. And year after year after year, they continue to believe it. It doesn't matter what Obama actually does. When 40% of the country says that he has been too hard on gun owners when it comes to regulations, the follow-up question should have been, name one thing he did that made it harder for you to own a gun in America. Or more inconvenient, or a bit slower to own a gun. And they would not have been able to name a particular thing prior to these extremely weak sauce gun regulations that he is putting into effect through executive order. And even those are so incredibly weak, I misinterpreted them when I first read them. I legitimately thought that he was closing the online and private party loophole that allowed people in something like 28 states, 28 states, to buy a gun online from a private party, and as long as it wasn't shipped overseas, not have to go through any background check. It's not even doing that. It's simply narrowing how many people can do that. And that is the source of conspiracy theories. Even something as weak as that is the source of conspiracy theories that is taking away all guns. Anderson Cooper, you can bring up the topic, and you should bring up the topic because it's scary and it's important. But it's not simply on the president to educate the public. You're a member of the media. You're an educated member of the media. You need to do it too. The media is so important in this country, historically and politically, and its job is to fight back against all the misinformation, the lies, the ignorance, the stupidity, the willful stupidity, the prejudice, the flaws in our human psyche, in our stupid lizard brain. And occasionally he does do that. And perhaps I'm being too hard on him to say that Anderson Cooper needs to do it every time. But in something as important as guns, when you know how much misinformation and ignorance is out there, you can't ask a question like that, 100% devoid of context.